To Anywhere and Everywhere, Beware. The Chronicles of Samuel. Written and read by Jack Haig. Chapter 2. You have to understand, I had no idea the events that were set in motion. I had no clue what to expect. Even before the clanging and grinding echoed from the door, it had me in its grasp. I was always going to open it. Its hum called out to me. It made me find it. It made me touch it. And now I could feel it calling to my entire being as my hand was touching the handle. As the door opened, it creaked the sound of 1,000 years of patience, and I was not prepared for what it had waiting for me. Snow. Lots of snow and lots of ice. It was July. There should not be any snow. Was it a freezer? Of course it wasn't a bloody freezer. I held out my hand, moving it past the threshold of the door, and touched the snow. It was falling from somewhere, and it was cold. I recoiled my hand in disbelief and closed the door behind me out of shock. I opened the door again, just to be sure. There was a wall. What the? I said aloud. I remembered touching the wall. It was cold, but not ice cold. It was stone, not like the corners of the doorway, not obsidian. Simple stone, like concrete. I was tempted to break it down if I didn't think it would break through my roof. I thought I was losing my mind and decided to shut the door, lock it, and after hearing the groaning of the mechanism, I went to bed. I didn't sleep. How could I? Snow? Snow! I kept asking myself if I'd imagined it. A normal person would likely have tried to open the door again, or would have stayed and inspected the door for a while. A normal person might actually have gone inside the door and placed a foot into the snow. That is clearly not the person I am. To be completely transparent, I was terrified. I thought I was losing my mind. It didn't occur to me that my new home could actually contain an attic with a magic door. I locked it, right? I kept worrying. It was the weekend, so I didn't have to get up at any particular time. I had no family or friends to see, and nobody was dependent on me, so there was no reason to get out of bed. I stayed in bed most of that Saturday, my eyes closed, wondering if it were real, or if this was the start of some latent psychosis brought on by adolescent issues. It took most of the day, but I worked up the courage to try again. I hadn't eaten the night before, and the next morning my stomach was in knots from worry, so I didn't eat then either. Looking back, I may have been struggling with a little unmanaged anxiety. I went back up those stairs and stood in the room, staring at the door for a while. I placed my hand on the doorknob once more and tried to turn it. Locked. Of course, I locked it. I turned the key, the same groaning echoed, and I turned the doorknob, opening the door slowly. A bright light broke through the crack in the door as it opened. Everything remained still. I braced for what I might be presented with, pulled open the door fully, and amazing! There it was. A wonderfully sunny day shining on the most beautiful woodland setting I had ever seen. Colours that were not normal or expected in a dreary British countryside. Purples, blues, pinks, oranges, reds, all spanning amongst flowers and trees. It was like looking at a gorgeously psychedelic painting right through the door. Like somewhere fairies and pixies might frolic freely. I couldn't help myself. I checked the door wouldn't close behind me. I wasn't sure how the door worked and was worried I would end up trapped in some otherworldly dimension, lost forever. At the same time, I didn't want to miss my chance of experiencing this wondrous place. a scene so picturesque that I barely had a second thought before walking through the door. I emerged in the colourful woodland out from a towering tree. It was stunningly, brilliantly blue. It had markings like it was made of scaled armour, not wood. I looked further up the tree and could see high above me. Its branches were larger and wider than anything I'd ever seen. Its leaves, or what I would have expected to be leaves, were more like balls of wool. They looked fuzzy and hung almost like fruit from otherwise bare branches. As I looked around, I realized every tree was like this, but in its own colour. More blues, yellows, reds, oranges, purples, and greens. Every colour I could imagine standing tall and powerful in a forest of artistic wonder. Bright and brilliant. The sunlight shined down through the branches, and their woolen fruit glistened. What I first thought were fluffy, soft, woolly leaves, when up close, appeared to glisten in the sunlight in a metallic sheen. I couldn't help but smile in awe. Nature made this. Somehow. There were flowers around the trees and across the grassy area I was standing in. I walked around the immediate vicinity for a little while to investigate, never letting the tree I entered from get too far from me. I'm unsure how long I was there for, but I was so awestruck that I didn't want to leave. I placed my hand on a tree, and the armour-like plating covering it was slightly warm. It was hard, as trees often are, and rough. The flowers were in bunches, but I didn't want to disturb the beauty of the area, so I left them be. I could only see a small section of the sky above the trees through the metallic woolen balls, and realised it was starting to get dark there. It made sense. As I'd said before, I had spent most of the day in bed. It must be approaching night by now. I walked back to the door in the tree I had started from, and, before entering, I stopped and listened. There was a soft whistle in the wind, but nothing else. No crickets, no buzzing or signs of animal life around. Either I'd spooked them by entering, or there was nothing here but the trees. I didn't want to find out what inhabited this land in the dark, or if it was particularly safe at night, so I left. I walked back through the convenient opening in the tree and back into my attic. I hesitated in closing the door, remembering how the snow became a wall the previous day. I didn't want to lose the forest, so I left it open ever so slightly and used an old candle holder that was left on the desk as a door stopper. I grabbed something from the fridge quickly and went back up the stairs to watch the light descend on the wooded area, taking it all in. This time, from the safety of the attic. I positioned a chair in front of the door, about 5 or 6 feet away, and opened the door fully again. It was almost pitch black by now. Oh, bugger, I missed it, I thought to myself. I watched the darkness, listening for any sound from behind the doorway. Nothing. Pure silence. I could hear the occasional creak of wood beneath the chair when my weight shifted, but nothing from behind the door. After maybe 10 or 15 minutes, I noticed several glowing lights appear in the distance. I could only see some of the lower branches from this side of the door, and it looked like light emanating across the branches in batches, as if they had been waiting for the darkness. I watched them for maybe an hour. It started slowly, small lights growing in the distance. I dozed off for a moment and awoke to a bright, sparkling light show. In my startled and dazed state, I watched as the lights grew bright and then popped, bursting, colourful, almost electric lights. The light show slowed down, and I hesitantly walked towards the door and poked my head through the threshold. It was silent. Only a small breeze could be heard rustling through the canopy. I watched another batch of lights start glowing above me, and suddenly, a set of small, high-pitched popping sounds began. I almost jumped out of my skin. I thought a gun had gone off and reflexively pulled my head back to safety. Silence again. I pushed my head back into the doorway and could hear the popping sounds building in speed. It started slowly, one or two at a time, like popcorn. Then, after a short while, the frequency increased to a sporadic popping frenzy. As this happened, sparks of light appeared, brightening up the area around and below the trees. I watched in amazement until it stopped completely, and the light of the new day descended on the area. This seemed almost impossible. It had been maybe a few hours. No way had I spent an entire night watching them. Even if I'd slept for a bit on the chair, I couldn't have spent the entire night there, right? With no windows in the attic, I had no way of knowing if the sun was rising outside. It was at that moment I decided to put a clock in the attic. Time must be kept and adhered to, Father always used to say. If you're late, you disrespect the time you were given. Which was funny to me as a child, since he wasn't ever present, never mind late to anything in my life that I could recall. I left my phone downstairs when I first came up to check on the door, so I went to grab it and found it was only just getting to midnight. So how was the sun coming up? Quickly as well. By the time I'd retrieved my phone and came back to the attic, the forest went from being dark with a hint of sunrise to a fully lit up forest floor. I placed an old clock in the attic and went back inside the door. The metallic woolen fruit leaves were no longer balls. In their place were long, drooping, vine-like plants hanging from them. Along the floor were several giant, what looked like fruit pits. As if giant mangoes had been eaten and the seed in the centre left along the woodland floor. I went over to touch the one nearest to the door, and it was warm. There was a small light still alive inside it, glowing silently and dominated by the sun above the canopy. Knowing what I do now, the trees would likely store up energy over a short period, and when night descended, the energy would be emitted in bright sparks of light, and they would spit out these huge pitted fruits, which was most likely how they multiplied. The one I touched was completely dry. However, there was something even bigger a few meters away that looked like it was still encased in a shell. When I inspected it, it dawned on me. They are fruit. There was some flesh left on this one. The metallic exterior was warm, the inside juicy, and with massive bite marks across it. I suppose I should have known then I wasn't alone in the woodland, and that something big, strong, and hungry dwelled here. Unfortunately, I did not have this realization until a cracking sound was heard in the treetops, and another fruit landed not too far from me, crashing into the floor. A loud screeching could be heard from where the fruit originated, and I looked up. Something big was hanging from the branch. It was quite high up, and what seemed like 20 or 30 stories above me, so I'm unsure what it actually looked like. The only thing that I recall is the feet. They were massive, dangling gorilla-like feet hanging high above me. And if the teeth marks on the fruit were any indication, they were very large. I was stuck, frozen, and unable to move, my heart pounding relentlessly. After working up the courage, I made a mad dash for the direction I thought I'd come from. I was unsure exactly where the door was right now, since I'd stupidly walked aimlessly towards the fruit splattered on the floor. I saw the first fruit, looked around in a panic, and there it was, the door. The hopeful sanctuary from these behemoth creatures mouldered into an unassuming tree. I can't say for sure if they noticed me so high up, if they cared I was there, or if they were even chasing me. All I know was that I did not want to find out. I did hear the snapping of branches, the crashing of more fruit hitting the floor, and the soul-shattering screeching behind me. Right behind me. Fortunately, I made it to the door unscathed. I ran through and slammed the door shut so hard the boom echoed throughout the attic, resonating off the walls. I am not ashamed to say I sat there for a moment and cried in my panicked state. You may be wondering why a grown man would be so shook up at the sight of an unknown, unverifiable creature that was merely hanging above him, that would cause him to panic and cry. You must understand, I have very little interaction with the outside world, people, or anything other than the safety of work and home. I am an introvert by choice, and barring some unpleasant interactions during my higher education, I made the choice to be alone and stay around comforts I could trust. This was an alien world to me, and it may as well have been Bigfoot lobbing boulders looking for a meaty human dinner. As far as I could tell, the creatures were hungry, and I was food. In my head, my life was on the line, even if it wasn't. The safety was gone, and all I knew had been thrown into turmoil. I may as well have been thrown into the middle of an active battlefield. It took a while to compose myself, and when I did, I locked the door, went to bed, shaken, my understanding of reality shattered. Needless to say, I managed very little sleep for the second night in a row. I didn't touch the door until the following weekend. Although it did call to me. It always called to me.